Welcome to this presentation on 50 Years of DAR Fashion and Femininity from 1890 to 1940 by Paula Myers McDevitt. Unless otherwise stated, the garments shown are part of Paula's personal collection. The Daughters of the American Revolution was founded on October 11, 1890, during the late Victorian or Bustle period, which ended in 1901. This slide shows the First Continental Congress of 1892. Presumably, several of these ladies would be wearing a bustle. This garment is a baby's wool Zouvet jacket from the 1890s. The term Zouvet comes from the jacket style worn by 1860s French infantrymen. Notice the jacket on the mannequin from the DAR Museum in Washington. It is very similar in style, tying underneath the arms and around the chest. Pictured here is a mourning capelet. Mourning clothing were also termed widow's weeds, which referred to the black clothing worn principally by female widows during the Victorian era. This one is made of lace, silk, and glass beads, also with sequins over horsehair canvas. Notice the insert of the photo where the lady is wearing a mourning capelet underneath her royal sash. White wedding dresses were rare during the Victorian era. This photo shows Grace Dennison Smith on September 16, 1890, wearing one of those rare white wedding dresses. The insert shows a dress from 1888, which could have been worn for an evening out or also as a woman's wedding dress. This 1890 trousseau gown was also worn by Grace Dennison Smith. Styles of this type would have been worn for carriage rides or as a walking gown. Notice the ladies in the DAR photo wearing similarly styled clothing. Another dress in a Victorian woman's wardrobe was the day dress. This one from the mid-1890s has a beautiful leg of mutton sleeve. That's the puff sleeve off the shoulder. Once a woman was finished wearing her dress, she would pass it on to her servants. The day dress from the previous slide is now styled with a work or kitchen apron, also from the 1890s. In the insert, No Ladies of Leisure, the women are wearing a much plainer dress, as they might not be able to afford some of the details in the day dress worn by wealthy women. Underneath every Victorian lady's dress was a crinoline. These crinolines from about 1880 to 1890s show a plain version, a fancy version which could have had handmade lace, and a horsehair canvas version which would have been stiffer and helped the dress have more form. Although drawers, also known as bloomers and pantaloons, were worn as early as the 1860s, this pair of split crotch drawers are from the 1890s. It was then recognized that ladies needed an easier way to do their business, hence the split crotch, so that they could just pull their skirt up with all of its volume and do what was needed to be done. In the 1890s, ladies wore evening sacks. This one is a simple cotton nightgown. Some would have been made of silk with handmade lace and very fancy. Notice the lady in the insert wearing a gown similar to the one pictured. I love the ad where she's using a period inhaler while she sleeps. Victorian women rarely cut their hair. Therefore, it was imperative that they brush or comb daily to get the oils from the scalp to the ends. Wealthy women would wear combing mantles or dressing jackets, as seen here in silk and cotton. These would be worn over their clothing to protect them from the daily brushing. Imagine how much easier it would be to clean the dressing jacket as opposed to an entire garment. Children during the Victorian era also wore distinct garments for specific occasions. This is a gown worn for a christening. Notice the cutwork embroidery at the hem. That's a technique where specific areas of fabric are cut out along satin stitch or button stitch embroidery. This baby's ensemble would have been worn when taken out for a walk in her carriage. The dress is made of cotton and the jacket of silk with beautiful embroidery. By 1895, dresses were often manufactured rather than homemade. These dresses are from Wanamaker's, which was founded in 1861. Silk parasols were carried by upper-class women from around 1870 to the early 1900s. It was imperative for them to keep the sun off of their face. Many parasols early on were trimmed in fringe, ruffles, or lace. Later versions had much cleaner lines, like that shown in the insert from the DAR Museum in Washington. Stick pins, largely created during the 1830s to 1920s, were for a utilitarian purpose. They might close a neckline or hold a scarf. However, stick pins allowed for wealthy women and men to forge a respectable appearance, which was incredibly important within their society. Later on, stick pins were worn as jewelry, again to show one's wealth. The Edwardian period, from 1900 to 1910, was known for elegance and luxury among the rich and powerful in Britain and the United States. It is also the last period in history to be named after a British monarch who reigned over it. During the Edwardian period, an S-shaped corset was used to create an S shape to the body. This linen walking dress was a perfect example of one worn during that period. I wonder how many of the ladies in the insert photo are wearing such a corset. I've talked about carriage dresses, walking dresses, and wedding dresses, but did you know tea dresses were an essential item in the Edwardian lady's wardrobe? Yes, she had a dress that was specifically worn to high tea. This one from the 1903s is a beautiful example. But what's with the black banding at the hem? It means that she was in the second mourning period, most likely from a loss of her husband. The insert shows a beautiful example of a tea dress that's in the DAR collection in Washington. In 1906, ladies started wearing a columnar silhouette. It had straighter lines on the top, with pleats and gores at the skirt. This red dress, made of cotton, has velvet trim and brass buttons. By 1907, it was common for women to wear separates. Look at this beautiful black linen skirt with the silk bands of ribbon and trapunta medallions. In the insert is a woman wearing a two-piece outfit. Unfortunately, not many women were carrying parasols at this time. As manufactured garments became more readily available to the general public, children started wearing corsets in the early 1900s. But from age 6 to 16, they also wore something called a corset waist, which was to start shaping their waist for later in life. Did you know boys in the early 1900s dressed the same as little girls? Here are a romper and plain shirt dress of the period. Aren't my grandfather and his brother just adorable? The Empire style of opulent neoclassical ornamentation and symbols saw a revival from 1909 to 1914. The idea of the hobble skirt is reported to have originated with French designer Paul Poirier, who in 1908 claimed that he had freed the bust but shackled the legs. The very nature of this skirt with such limited mobility was marketed to wealthy women who lived lives of luxury and ease. The dress was, however, redesigned with a slightly wider hem or a slit in the back to make it easier for the average woman to walk. On the left is a lady's equestrian suit from 1911. Because it was still unpopular for ladies to wear jappers during this period, many ladies had a three-piece equestrian suit. She would wear the jappers at the barn and the skirt when riding out in public. The suit on the right is part of the DAR collection in Washington. The lines of this suit for everyday wear are very similar to that of the equestrian suits. The empire waist, empire silhouette, empire line, or just empire is a style of clothing in which the dress has a fitted bodice ending just below the bust, giving it a high-waisted appearance. This lovely silk and lace dress is a wonderful example from the period. Fashion changed dramatically during World War I and post-World War, which was 1914 to 1920. Women's fashion had less ornamentation and less detail. Military-inspired fashions were very popular during this period. But notice the opera jacket from 1914. Ladies of means still did not want to give up their luxury, so this is a garment made of silk with a white mink collar, but the lines are still reminiscent of those worn during the period. Lawn dresses were very popular during this period. But do you know where the lawn dress gets its name? Is it because they were often worn for outdoor outings? Maybe, but not really. It's because most of them were made out of lawn fabric, a lawn cotton, which was tightly woven. This dress, however, is made out of dotted Swiss. Don't the ladies of the DAR look smashing in their lawn dresses? How did a silk piano scarf become fashion? Well, during the war, when fabric was hard to come by, ladies would literally take the scarf off the piano and wrap it around their bodies. However, not everyone did this, and it was more common for those who, let's say, worked in the entertainment industry. This is another military-inspired item, the child's sailor coat. Notice the lines are very reminiscent of the Navy uniform. This was a very patriotic time in America, and emulating our men and women who worked towards the war effort and fought was a very patriotic thing to do. The 1920s are characterized by two distinct periods of fashion. In the early part of the decade, change was slower, and there was more reluctance to wear the new, revealing, popular styles. However, from 1925, the public more passionately embraced the new styles, now typically associated with the Roaring Twenties. This net dress with a beautiful pearl button closure is very reminiscent of the early 1920s conservative look. The ladies in the DAR photo are also sporting a more conservative look for the period. This rayon and lace flapper dress from 1925 is reminiscent of one that would be worn during the day. Doesn't Laura Haynes Cook look absolutely radiant in her flapper dress? Did you know that orange was among the most popular colors for brunette ladies in the 1920s? Look at these two fabulous orange flapper dresses. This is a quintessential example of a silk beaded flapper dress from 1926. In the insert is also a dress part of the DAR collection. Did you know that these beads were made of glass and the dresses were extremely heavy? It's a wonder that women could dance in them the way they did. In the 1920s, neoclassic operas were in vogue. It was important for ladies to dress in the latest fashions from Paris, New York, and Philadelphia. The bolero jacket has a long history in the world of fashion. By the late 1920s, it took on a new look, reinvented as a lace shrug. This one has glass-beaded tassels at the hem and sleeves. As in art and architecture, Art Deco fashion introduced geometric shapes and long lines into clothing. Shown here is a silk teddy and a straight-line chemise. Notice the teddy in the insert, which is part of the DAR collection in Washington, D.C. Following the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923, inexpensive and informal ready-to-wear kimonos made of rayon became highly popular for their bright colors and intricate designs, many of which took inspiration from the Art Deco movement. Although this bathing suit looks like a woman's, it was actually worn by men. Women of the period would wear knee-length dresses with wool stockings underneath. Remember, all of the bathing suits of this time were made of wool. Can you imagine going to the beach on an 80 or 90 degree day in a wool outfit? Oh my goodness. Beautiful ladies of the 1920s carried equally beautiful purses. Most were made of mesh and beading. The mesh handbags were made from various metal, while the beads could be glass, seed, or faceted beads, and many were handmade using mail-order kits. A long strand of pearls may be one of the most recognizable accessories of the 1920s, but also very popular during that period was the cloche hat, a man's tuxedo scarf, and a man and a woman's dress scarf. Feathers and paste jewelry were also popular accessories during the 1920s. Feathers would be used on collars, hats, and even purses. The most popular feathers used were ostrich and peacock, but they also came from other exotic birds. The gems were made from glass with a high lead content. That glass was called paste. Hair combs, clips, and picks rose in popularity significantly during the 1920s as a replacement for metal bobby pins that were hard to get because of rationing from World War I. Some were faux tortoise and gold tone, but the majority were made from Bakelite, an early plastic, with or without rhinestones. In the 1930s, fashion saw a profound influence from film and specifically Hollywood. A return to conservatism after the Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression also marked the fashion during this period. In the 1930s, fashion saw a profound influence from film and specifically Hollywood. A return to conservatism after the Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression also impacted fashion during this period. One such dress influenced by film was the dirndl, worn by both women and young girls. Marlene Dietrich made the style popular after wearing in the 1931 movie Dishonored. Shirley Temple was another famous 1930s actress. She was often photographed carrying a doll whose outfit would emulate hers. Therefore, many little girls of the time wanted that look as well. These pink ensembles are very reminiscent of what the little girls and their dolls would wear. Also made popular by Shirley Temple was the day or play dress. Gone were the days of restricting clothing and corsets, and in were the new comfortable styles that could be moved in easily for day wear and play. Rayon is a semi-synthetic fiber made of regenerated cellulose. By the end of the 1930s, rayon was 6 times as plentiful as silk. Here's a lovely example of a rayon dress made with a pink dot fabric and ruffles. It appears that President General Miss Hobart and her personal pages are wearing rayon dresses as well. Rayon is a semi-synthetic fiber made of regenerated cellulose. By the 1930s, rayon was 6 times as plentiful as silk. Here's a darling example of a pink rayon dress with polka dots and ruffles. It appears that President General Mrs. Hobart and her personal pages are wearing rayon dresses as well. Up to and including the 1920s, black clothing was considered mourning attire. All of this changed in the 1930s when Coco Chanel printed a short, simple black dress on the cover of Vogue magazine. By the mid to late 1930s, the suit dress had become increasingly popular. As you can see from the ad, the average dress was about $4. Using an inflation calculator, that would be $67 today. However, searching on the internet shows that most of these styles would cost at least $200 or more, 3 times the price of a dress back in the 1930s. The Peter Pan collar goes back to 1905 when the first American stage production of Peter Pan was shown. Maude Adams wore a foresty-looking blouse with a white rounded collar. By the 1930s, the style had become de rigueur, required etiquette, for women guests to wear at weddings. In the 1930s, a ruffled collar added to a blouse or dress was very popular. Remember, people had less money than before, but were still interested in fashion. So a great way to make their new, lower budget conscious garments stylish was to add a ruffle. In the mid to late 1930s, bolero-style jackets were worn over evening gowns to add versatility. The dresses could be worn with or without the jacket, creating 2 distinct looks. In this photo of the generals of the DAR, the bolero could be put over any of their gowns and worn to a second event at a convention. In the 1930s, pelt stoles became the rage. This one is made out of fox fur. In the photo, President General Helena Hellwig Pouch is wearing hers. In Italy, the color yellow refers to crime stories, both fictional and real. This association began around 1930, when the first published series of crime novels had yellow covers. Yellow is also the color of caution. Yellow lights signal drivers to slow down in anticipation of stopping. So what do you think? Do these yellow camisoles and slips refer to crime or caution? The Hoover or Hooverette emerged in the 1930s, named after Herbert H. Hoover, who was in charge of the U.S. Food Administration at that time. How many of your grandmothers wore the Hooverette? Accessories of the 1930s included hats, gloves, and belts. But by far, the most popular was the purse for its utilitarian purposes. Clutches and bags with mirrors were especially popular. Once again, using an inflation calculator, A 59-cent purse back then would equal about $9.89 today. But in reality, quality bags easily cost 10 times that value. In conclusion, I'd like to end with this quote from Coco Chanel. Because no matter how many times fashion changes, she says, every day is a fashion show and the world is the runway. Thank you.